he leans across the table and he goes, "Mark, don't F with me."
Mark Winters, author of Rocket Fuel and now author of the book Visionary, is joining us today since he just launched his book 2 freaking days ago.
And so now this guy had just thrown a big wrench in my plan. And I just kind of sat back and I'm like, well, this sucks. Well, I think it's time for me to go. And so, the words were out of my mouth. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. The people I worked with, they're in shock. I'm in shock. He's in shock. We're all in shock. And I get to go make a phone call to my wife that says, well, I quit. And she goes, "You get a package?" They didn't even offer me one. She's like, "Are you kidding me? What are you going to do?" For people to have an appreciation and, your podcast, talking to people and kind of hearing their stories, hopefully gives a sense for others who are considering it of, all right, you ready for this?
Yep.
You ready to really sweat it? You ready to, have to have a sleepless night figuring out how you're going to scrape together enough cash to, make the payroll is the sort of the cliche thing that people will say, but it's a real thing.
Welcome to Unlocking Moves. We want to take you inside those stories and decision points to really change the lives of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear their stories, their real stories, because I think we learn the most from stories, especially entrepreneurs. But Mark, I don't want to hear just your glory stories. I want to hear your gory stories, because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. So today I've got a great episode. Mark Winters, author of Rocket Fuel and now author of the book Visionary, is joining us today. And I've got a whole story about how this came about and how we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants because we scheduled this at the last minute. And Mark is so gracious to be here since he just launched his book 2 freaking days ago. So, but before we get into any of that, Mark, I think I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment to really keep them on their toes, keep my audience on their toes. You ready for this?
I hope so.
All right, Mark, what a lot of people don't know about you is that one time you intercepted a pass from the Hall of Famer Roger Staubach in Cowboy Stadium and ran it back for a touchdown. A, is that true or false? And B, tell me about that experience.
So first, how do you even know that?
Well, I re-listened to our episode that we did in 2021. And that came out.
All right, so you got that story out of me once before. Yeah, so it is true. And what was the second question?
Tell me about the experience.
The story, yeah. So that's just sort of a fun fact when we kind of ask people to tell something that's unique about them that isn't true about anybody else in the room, and I figured it's a short list that can say that, so I'll throw that one out. But yeah, I was actually a client of Staubach Realty, right? So there's his real estate company, and so they helped me with some things, and I was fortunate enough to get invited to go to the annual flag football game at Texas Stadium and play with Roger, and actually I got to go more than once, and had sort of an embarrassing experience the first time because we got to bring our kids with us, and my kids saw me drop a pass from Roger. And, the thing I hear, first I'm already embarrassed because I dropped the ball. And then I hear one of my kids' voice just says, "Oh, Dad." And I mean, it just echoed forever in that stadium. That's all I could hear. So I'm just hanging my head, feeling terrible. So the next year I was not gonna let that happen. And so I had a good day against Roger, although he sets a very high bar, to this day. So quite a man and quite a legend. And so what a guy.
So Mark, I'm gonna jump ahead and just assume that's your unlocking move. You persevered, you overcame the shame of dropping a pass with your kids in front of you, and the next year you came back and intercepted and got a pick six from Roger Staubach. The show's done. Unlocking move.
Right. Drop the mic.
All right, guys, as you could tell, this is Mark Winters. We're going to have a great episode today. Mark, most of you know Mark as the author of Rocket Fuel. That's how I know him best. And he's got a lot of other great qualities and experiences. He's also written the book Visionary, which, as I mentioned earlier, came out 2 days ago. He started his career at P&G, which is a great platform, but looks like he's been an entrepreneur most of his life. And I want to dig into some of his stories for sure. So welcome to Unlocking Moves, Mark Winters.
Thanks, Kurt. I'm glad to be here, man.
All right, let's go. Well, hey, so as I kind of alluded to before, you were on a previous or predecessor show of mine. We called it Let's Go. It was just a kind of a live show that we did as part of the pandemic, coming out of it, trying to get people to be positive thinking and overcome adversity and stop lamenting whatever was going wrong and just figure out a way. Let's go. And then, a couple of years later, I launched Unlocking Moves. And candidly, Mark, I think I might have stolen the words of the term Unlocking Moves, either from you or Vern Harnish or Gino Wickman, somebody, but this concept of these key pivot points or something in our career that really can change our lives or our trajectory. I don't know if you've ever used those words, but I'm trying to find out where I stole them from.
Yeah, well, I can't take credit for it, but I use the term just in terms of finding that unlock, that thing when you're stuck, you just can't seem to figure out how to get out of it. And, it's interesting the different places those unlocks can come from. Other people, a question that you get asked, something that you happen to, see or read or run into or listen to. So they come from unexpected places in my experience. But fortunately, I've been lucky enough to find a few of those along the way.
Let's dive into that for a second, because you touched on a good point. It comes from a lot of different places. And why that's important to me is we need to be open to seize the opportunity. I say that because one of my podcast producer, he passed this year, but his claim to fame was he was an editor for Inc. magazine, and he wanted to have Richard Branson on his do an article about Richard Branson. So he reached out to Richard Branson, and nobody responded. And he reached out to Richard Branson, and nobody responded. And finally, after a few 10 tries or whatever, they finally said, "We're not going to do an article with you. We don't want to do an Inc. magazine article." And so he doubled down and started doing it more. No, finally phone calls. And at the end of the day, he finally got Richard Branson to do a story with him. And he's flying on his private jet to Necker Island to do a story, and they're fast friends, and just a great story about his career after that. My point is, everybody, literally everybody in this day and age could reach out to Richard Branson, Mark Winters, Elon Musk, whatever, but that persistence, the stick-to-itiveness, the gumption, whatever it is, to follow through and keep going. Those are the types of things I want people to be open to be able to see that there is an opportunity in front of me and seize it. So that's what I just heard in what you said, but tell me more. Today's episode is brought to you by Chinook Seedery, the best sunflower seeds ever. Available online at chinookseedery.com and Amazon, or wherever you get your seeds, including Buc-ee's, Dick's Sporting Goods, Shields, Love's Travel Stop, Circle K, and thousands of other locations around the country.
Yeah, so I guess I've experienced both sides of that, right? So there's been times when there's something that I really wanted and sort of wouldn't take no for an answer. And then there's experiences where I've been the one, I guess, pursued.
Here in this podcast.
And so, well, yeah, I mean, you've certainly been persistent. I'm glad we've been able to work it out. In that case, though, it was less one of me like trying to avoid you or dodge it, and truly one of just kind of logistical coordination and being able to find a time when we could pull that off. But I was actually telling a story the other day, Kurt, that you reminded me of when you tell that. And I had a business that I was starting. It was really kind of the first business where I had to go raise money and do my thing. It was really, I guess, my first big entrepreneurial leap. I'd left the corporate world, and in an interesting way, that's probably a different story we could talk about. But written my business plan. I was doing the thing that I thought I had learned to do in business school for how you go start a company. And I had some investors. I had kind of gone out on a limb and secured some retail space for this business, and I needed an architect to design this thing. And there was somebody in the marketplace that was clearly the one. They were known, they were loved, they were respected, they were hot, they were all the stuff. And so I go and I sit down and I meet with them and I share with them my vision for this project. And they were super nice, super friendly, super interesting. And we had a really, really nice meeting. And then they said they'd kind of go away and think about it. And so they went away, and then they came back and they said, we love what you're doing, but we're not the ones for you. you need to go talk to so and so and so and so and so and so. And I remember that just sort of crushed me. I was like, "Are you kidding? You're the ones. I can see it. I mean, it's all you're part of the plan. You're part of the vision here." And they're like, "Yeah, well, you're just we're more this kind of big project, that kind of big project." And in the scheme of things, I think they looked at me and they thought I was going to be small and maybe bothersome because of how involved I was, or I don't know exactly what. But I, at that stage of my life in particular, didn't take no no easily or well. And so I was like, come on, there's got to be a way. What has to be true? Let's figure this out. There's got to be a way where we can make this work. And ultimately, after a little bit of persistence, I mean, it wasn't anything epic, but it was a little bit of, taking a stance and leaning into it, that we found the common path, and they came alongside me and did their part, and it was awesome. So they did a great job, and I was better for it.
Well, you stayed persistent, and I appreciate that. I was reminded of somebody the other day said that no is just an opportunity to repitch or something like that, like
Yeah,
the
I
first
used to
no
have
is never take the first no.
I had a sales manager that he would say basically whenever somebody not just said no, but when they push back on whatever, he go, "Oh, good, now we get to negotiate." And he was so excited about that because everything was in play at that point.
I love it. Hey, let's do a quick background on this session itself. So, as most people know, I'm in the middle of a sabbatical. It's not a long one, or maybe it's not. I'm not sure how long it's going to be. It's been about a couple months. And right before I left, I reached out to Mark's team and said, "Hey, I'd love to have Mark on the show again, maybe in January, February when I come back." And the answer was, "Hey, yeah, we'll let you know when something frees up." And then he launched his book literally Tuesday. And so I reached out again and said, hey, even though I'm on a sabbatical, I said, "Hey, your book just came out. Now has got to be the time, right? You're not going to say no to me now." And so they said, maybe Thursday, maybe Friday, we'll look. And then late last night, I'm checking email at 11 o'clock, and he's like, "How about 10:30?" I'm like, "Oh shit, I got to get going." So anyway, we're pulling it together. But this, as I told Mark earlier, this is just a real raw conversation. So you guys are getting a real treat. So I want to come back to, I had you on the show in 2021, right as we were coming out, if you will, of the pandemic.
Yep.
And we had a great conversation. Most of that was about the integrator and visionary uh, tendencies and how you work together. We went through the 5 rules. It was a great discussion about that. A lot of that stuff is in Mark's book, Rocket Fuel, we talked about before. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know about Rocket Fuel. But you made a comment at the end of the show, and you said, and I quote, "Entrepreneurs are the answer for a lot of stuff." And that hits me hard because as I'm on sabbatical and thinking out about what I want to do next, there's a calling, it's been a calling for probably 15 years, about capitalism for good.
Mm.
If we can make money and do good, we can sustain it financially. We can sustain the change that we want. If we donate to charity, great. That's it's beautiful, and I respect that. But if we can make money and reduce global warming or solve poverty or human trafficking or whatever, we can truly make the world a better place. I want to dig into that comment a little bit.
Yeah, so I love that you captured that, and the way that I guess I said it that day is it's sort of a casual way of something that I say fairly frequently, which is I believe that entrepreneurs are the answer to some of the most important problems that we have, really on the planet. And so it's not just a lot of stuff, although that's certainly true. I mean, it's big stuff. It's important stuff, and you just think about you really throughout history and how things start. And somebody sees something, somebody has an idea, they have this uncontrollable urge. You'll hear it talked about as kind of an entrepreneurial seizure, where they see this move that they got to make, and even against the best advice of others, many times they just can't resist it. They've got to do it. They got to go for it. And so that's what makes it happen. That's what makes it start. I love the way that you sort of brought the capitalism into it from the perspective of sustainability, right? Because we've got this seed, this spark that gets it going. But if we can't build an economic engine around it of some fashion, it makes it really hard to keep it up. And then it becomes dependent or draining on whatever the other sources of support might be. So I think that combination is powerful. I think it's important. It's necessary. Um, it's it's growing is my feeling.
Mm.
I can't give you, you know, data on that, but it just feels like we're moving more and more into a time where entrepreneurship it's an option. And it may not be the best option for everybody. So I'm not saying that. And I think people need to take a good hard look, because now it's kind of gotten to a place where it's a little bit sexy, and that's dangerous, because somebody thinks they're going to make that move because it's cool or it's sexy, and they're not ready for it. They're not made for it, whatever the situation might be. And so that could lead to a bad outcome. In fact, I would point to Gino wrote a book several years ago now called Entrepreneurial Leap. And so for anybody who is or knows of somebody who's kind of an entrepreneur in the making, I would send them to that book, because it can kind of help you think through, all right, is this really something for me? Because as you know, Kurt, I mean, it's a wild, woolly world when you're doing that stuff and you're fighting that fight. And some days are just flat out awful. Some are great. I mean, you get high highs, but you get some low lows to go with it. And it's a roller coaster ride in a certain sense. And my perspective is, hey, it's those lows make the highs that much better. It's that delta that gives a lot of the juice and makes it fun and all that kind of stuff. But you ask my wife, and her experience of it is completely different. She doesn't like that. She doesn't like roller coasters, and so she would just rather be kind of cruising at a nice level with fewer surprises. But sometimes different people end up together, and we make the best of it.
Hey, you just touched on two things that could absolutely be a great book. One is the entrepreneurs is not for everybody, and it's hard, and it requires this amazing grit and passion and pursuit of something. And being married to or in a relationship with an entrepreneur is not for everybody. You need to write a marriage counseling book around being a spouse of an entrepreneur. Mark, is
Yeah,
that your
so
next book?
I don't have the answers for that. I could give you a list of, wrong ways to do it, and puzzles and problems for sure. Now I am very blessed to be married to a very great and wonderful woman who has stuck with me for the last, gosh, we're coming up on 34 years here in February. So she did not know what she was signing up for at the beginning, for sure. But so something's worked. But the other side of it is, it is hard. And for people to have an appreciation, and your podcast, talking to people and kind of hearing their stories, hopefully gives a sense for others who are considering it of, all right, you ready for this?
Yep.
You ready to really sweat it? You ready to have to have a sleepless night figuring out how you're going to scrape together enough cash to, make the payroll? Is sort of the cliche thing that people will say, but it's a real thing. I mean, I've had to do it. And most folks at some point in their career have had to figure out, all right, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to hang on for another week, another day, so I can, have another at bat to kind of get the next thing and keep it going. It's interesting. As part of the book launch, I've got a weekly email newsletter that I send out, right? And one of the topics that we touched on, the visionary book's organized around these 10 pillars of how to be a great visionary. Well, one of them is to maintain warrior shape. And what that's about is, again, because it's tough, you better be solid. So when you hit that hard day, that hard stretch, that hard whatever, you're not already on your limit, and you just crumble easily. So you got to have a good solid foundation, both, physically, mentally, spiritually, that you're maintaining, so that you can handle stuff. You can bounce, you can react and respond to the things that are going to get thrown at you that are nasty and gnarly. So we send this email out, and I'm just kind of talking about that pillar at a high level. But I asked people a question about, how full their tank was in these different areas. And Kurt, the responses were absolutely unbelievable. the things that people shared with me, I mean, they just opened up, and it was, one after another is describing this situation. And they're at the same time, they're saying, I can't believe I'm writing this to you. But something about the message just resonated with them so deeply that they needed help. And they're feeling the weight and the burden of, what it means to be an entrepreneur, and some help, some path for how to work through that, how to get from this place they find themselves to this place they really want to be, which is the place, when we start out, we envision, hey, this is going to be great. I'm going to be my own boss. I'm going to make lots of money. I'm going to, work whenever I want, all this all this stuff. Right. And then fast forward to most entrepreneurs that start with that idea, and 12 months in, 18 months in, take a look at them, see how they're doing.
You've touched on something very important, Mark. And first of all, well said, and kudos to getting the word in about your wife. That was excellent work and a veteran move there. I'm sure she's a avid viewer of our podcast, so she'll catch that. But you said some really good things there about mental health and about the fortitude that it takes, and that there's some really tough days. And I think that's really important for entrepreneurs to hear, that they're not alone. They're not the only people that are struggling. Sometimes you get in these YPO or Vistage circles or whatever, and everyone seems to be, jetting around the country, and that's not reality. Nobody's got it figured out, even if they have the private jets, nobody's got it figured out. So just know that you're not alone with that. You're also not alone in your challenges, and there are resources for other groups of folks like us, entrepreneurs who are struggling to band together and share stories. And some of those organizations are things like EO, YPO, Vistage, and I know EOS and other ones you probably know of, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, there are a lot of resources out there, and this feeling of isolation and loneliness is commonplace. So yeah, no, you're not alone. In the group in Oklahoma, and we used to have a saying too about some people are big hat, no cattle. And so they talk about all this stuff that's working and all this stuff that's great, but there's something else going on there that you're not hearing about. And so, we've all got our stuff, we've all got our challenges. And so it's part of it, but, peer groups are an important part of the equation. One of the other pillars in the book is to surround yourself. And, my picture of this one, Kurt, is, did you see the movie, The 300?
Yes.
Okay. You like it?
I love anything that's like an underdog story.
Right. So great movie. I mean, super cool and unique how they shot that. But, the story of the Spartans facing off against the Persians, dramatically outnumbered. But there's a scene in that movie where, Leonidas calls out shield wall, right? And they all drop their shields and block off and protect each other. And there's a certain way that has to work where you've got every hole covered and they all are working together. But I think about that when I think about the world that the entrepreneur is going into every day. They've got just all these threats swirling around them and all these different negative forces really that are trying to get to them. And so I identified what I call 7 posts that you've got to have around you. One of those is a peer group. One of those is an integrator. One of those is an assistant, right? One of those is a strong leadership team. You've got coaches and consultants that play a role. You've got family and friends that play a role, right? So there's all of these different posts that you need to establish around you, and make sure they're filled with somebody that's great, that you trust, that cares about you, that is going to actually, lock in to build this shield wall effectively around you. And then if you'll do that, it generates what we call 7 forces. And this roots back to an early mentor that Gino Wickman had, that had talked to him about these. And it was someone that he worked with closely, as 7 special people that you have in your life that bring these 7 special forces to you. And so it's stuff that we all need as a visionary entrepreneur if we're going to be successful and we're going to survive the day after day after day. So surrounding yourself with the right stuff is a fundamental piece.
Well, look, there's a lot in there. There's a lot around the entrepreneurial world, and I'd love to talk a little bit about your background, and how you got here, because I think I'm being drawn towards this audience of these earlier stage entrepreneurs. I just feel a passion for helping early stage folks. And your book, the book that you mentioned from Gino called Entrepreneurial Leap, is definitely going to be on the list. However, You've talked about the book. I wanted to talk about the book anyway. Let's go ahead and knock it out. Your book is called Visionary. It came out Tuesday. It's already on several bestseller lists, as I understand. True transparency, I have not read it yet. I haven't even ordered it yet, but I didn't even know it was out. So I need to get on your email list, first of all. So tell me how I'll get on your email list so that our listeners know.
Yeah, so you go to markcwinters.com and there's a link. So that's the easiest way.
All right, perfect. Now let's talk about the book. So you wrote this book, Rocket Fuel, several years ago. We know last time I talked to you in 2021, there was a book that you were in the process of writing called Freedom, Exponential Freedom.
Right.
As I understand, that's still in process, but you jumped ahead to Visionary. Tell me all about it.
Yeah. So, well, here I happen to have like the first handheld copy of the book here. So that's the book, just so everybody can see it. This was,
dude, congratulations. This is not an easy process. So let's start there. Congratulations.
It was funny. It showed up this past weekend. So, the production, the publishing machine is doing its thing. And so I actually get a physical copy in my hand, like 4 days before it actually goes live on Amazon and everywhere else. And so it was cool because, 10 years ago, it's been a little over 10 years since Gino Wickman and I wrote Rocket Fuel together. And that was the first book that I was involved with. And Gino gets so much credit for inventing the term visionary and integrator and really inviting me into the process of collaborating on a book with him. And then, we sort of do this mind meld and we create what became Rocket Fuel. And this whole journey kind of starts together. But that was the last time that I had held a book that we had written. So I kind of forgot what it felt like. And so I'm opening this package when it shows up on my doorstep. And it's like all these feelings kind of come rushing over you, which I know And it's like, wow, all the people that helped you and did this and did that, all the work, all the hours that went into it. And then this, this flicker of, hope that, somebody will read this and that it'll do something positive, that it'll help them. So
if you don't mind, Mark, let me pause on that just for a second, because I want to dive into this humanistic approach or concept that you just mentioned. And that is this feeling of anticipation, this feeling of pride, this feeling of probably mental exhaustion because you've been through a long process to get here. And also that feeling of, will people read it? Right. I was talking to somebody recently about Jerry Seinfeld, or maybe it was Eddie Murphy, said that the biggest thing that they're afraid of when they're on stage is that they're afraid of silence.
Yeah.
That people don't like the joke, and even people like that. And so I just want the audience to feel, here's a best-selling freaking author still having those feelings of anticipation and of, I hope they like it. So just kudos to you for stepping out and doing it. And congratulations again.
Yeah, thanks. That means a lot. And, there's another friend of mine who's an author. And I remember when he wrote his first book, he goes, maybe just my wife and I will read this, and that's okay. So he kind of had his head right around that possibility. But this one, for me, it was a natural extension of the work that Gino and I did together in Rocket Fuel, where that thing turned into a whole business, a whole training business of working with integrators and visionaries to help them understand how to be better in their role and how to really operate better as a visionary integrator duo. And so out of that, we sort of started with the integrator, because we felt like, kind of like we're talking, visionaries had lots of folks already kind of helping them. There were lots of CEO peer groups already in the market, and people are talking to them. They're after them. They're trying to support them, but there was nobody for the integrator. And so it's kind of like, okay, how can we help? And so the focus was, all right, we need to help people recognize that they are an integrator or have the potential to be one. So we had assessments for that. We began to educate people again through the book Rocket Fuel. And from there, we implemented a workshop, a training program to help an integrator see what it looked like for them to be truly great in the role, right? So to help them really embrace the role and be the best they could possibly be at it. So fast forward about, 7 years. And it was funny, the integrators would, in these workshops, they would ask me, so you have something like this for visionaries? I think my visionary would really benefit from some kind of a program like this for them, so that they would know how they should work, productively in one of these visionary integrator duos. And so I thought about that, and I'm like, there's probably some merit to that. And eventually I basically, it just sort of came out of me, just from all the patterns and all the conversations, but it's like, boom, 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 boom. Here's 10 things. And so I dubbed those the 10 pillars and bounced them off some people, got positive feedback that, yeah, that seems to hit, tweaked them a little bit. And then I gave a talk at an EOS conference out in San Diego. So I had a room full of visionaries and integrators and introduced that. And the response was great. They loved it. They ate it up and seemed to want more. So then began teaching it as a workshop. And so, we've got, other expert EOS implementers that are now beginning to teach that content. And so took all of that and really expanded on it. And that's where the book comes from. It answers the question, what does it really look like? And what does it really take if you want to be truly great in this role as a visionary? And that's what it's for.
It's absolutely a necessary book, the concept, and I can't wait to dive in. And I love that the integrators are like, "Hey, wait a minute, these guys need a little bit of training too,
Right.
folks." I mean, we Mark and I were talking before our call. I have an epilogue in my book, "Who's Your Mike?" The epilogue is called "When You're the Problem," and it's basically around this concept of visionaries might think that they are the greatest thing since, baked bread, but then, they hire people and they keep having other people that are the problem. So maybe you're the problem. So I can see where the integrators were asking for help. So, okay, let's dive in. So I don't know if we have time for all 10 pillars, but you know what? We'll list them all out. Give me the Cliff Notes version. I don't want to take up all of your time today, but give me the.
Yeah, so I don't know that we can list them all. That's probably beyond the scope of this, but I'll just kind of call out a couple that are maybe important. So one is,
Yeah, you got to tease us enough to want to buy the book. You can't give us all the material.
if you're feeling it, and if the message resonates, I trust people will go for something that will help them. But the first pillar, interestingly, Kurt, is it's something that we learned in rocket fuel as we started thinking about how to connect a visionary and an integrator. I began to talk about it as the rocket fuel formula was really to crystallize your understanding of what this whole visionary integrator thing is, this structure, and to get clear to a point that you could decide whether it was something that would help you or not, right? Because if somebody, great, they may be a visionary, but they may look at this and go, yeah, I'm not doing that. That's not for me. And that's great. There's lots of ways to be successful if you don't choose this path. But if you do, the way we wrote Rocket Fuel was the first chapter is about the visionary. So it's funny, you talk to a visionary that read Rocket Fuel, and this story came up time and time again. They read the first chapter and they loved it. Well, of course they loved it. It's all about them, right? And then they read the second chapter. Maybe they read the second chapter. The second chapter is about the integrator, and they get some distance through that. Maybe they read the whole thing, but maybe they just read kind of the first part or halfway through, and then it clicks and they go, yep, I want one. And that's when it gets hard, because now they got to go find one. Right. And that's when we got to, work with somebody who's experienced and great at finding these people and bringing them together, which you know a ton about. Right. And this whole connection process. So we started thinking about, all right, how do we get these folks connected? And it was very obvious that the first step was this deep look inside of introspection about really understanding who you are and how you're made as a visionary. And so in Rocket Fuel, we talk about the 2-piece puzzle, the visionary and the integrator. And so if you're going to go look for that other puzzle piece, your missing puzzle piece, you've got to understand the shape of your edge before you can ever begin to understand the shape of the edge that you're out there looking for. So no big surprise when we look at the 10 pillars for a visionary. Pillar 1 is know thyself, right? It's an ancient term from the Greeks, and it's stuck around for a long time because it's very powerful and very true. And so there's a whole lot of things that the visionary has to think through and has to know about themselves. The fit that they're going to have with their integrator is just one. Many entrepreneurs that I see and work with, they find themselves at a place where they're not exactly sure how they got there. It wasn't necessarily intentional. They just sort of have somehow ended up there through a series of decisions and choices. And where they are may or may not be aligned with where they actually want to be and what they want to be doing. And so that's a super important thing to get clear on as well. And so, back to, you mentioned the Exponential Freedom book that I'm working on. And that framework is really the heart of what that's all about. It's how do you get clear on what you really want? And the origin of that goes back to a hike that my wife and I were taking up in Colorado one day, and we get in this discussion of, would you rather be rich or would you rather be king? Right. And so that's a classic entrepreneurial debate. I probably had that discussion a dozen times in my life, and depending on where I was in my journey of maturity, answered it different ways every time and had a reason for it. And whatever reason, on that day that she and I talked about it, my answer was, well, it depends. It depends on which one of those is going to give me more of the freedom that I want. And as I said those words, I thought to myself, what does the freedom that I want actually look like? And I wasn't sure. I didn't have a great answer. And so that led me down a path of, all right, how in the heck do I define that? How do I define what the freedom that I want looks like? So Kurt, what I did is I pulled everybody's list. All the gurus have a list, right? So these 4 things, these 7 things, these 5 things, these whatever, they've all got your list. And so I pulled them all together, like 25 of them, and I put them up on a board. And I did this big clustering process where I'd go, okay, this is just a different way of saying that. Those are the same. Yeah, this seems to go with that. And I worked it all out. And it turns out that there are 9. There are 9 what I call domains of freedom, where you get to make a choice, where you can actually decide what you want this to look like. And so it also turns out that they are interrelated. So if you're going to have more of this one, it probably means you're going to have less of this one. And if you'll get stronger at this one, it's going to help you get stronger at that one. And so there's these relationships between them. But the bottom line is, when I look at them and I rank them or I define what I want them to look like, my answers are going to be completely different than yours. They're going to be completely different than my wife's. They're going to be completely different than Gino's or whoever's listening to this, right? So we all have our own answers to that test. And your answer is what I call your unique freedom. And so that's what we're striving for. So as an entrepreneur, a visionary entrepreneur sitting here leaning into this role, it's also important that you have this context, this landscape, this map of where you want to go, so that you can begin to answer questions. Okay, how does this business serve me getting more of this unique freedom that I have decided that I want? So chapter 1, Know Thyself, dives into that. It dives into, what does your unique freedom look like? What does your, what I call your intrinsic genius look like? That's the intersection of the stuff that you just love to do, the stuff that you're really, really great at, and the stuff that you are intrinsically driven to impact, the stuff that you care most about, right? So it's kind of, think about that as a Venn diagram where all that stuff kind of comes together. That's your sweet spot. And so we want to get you in a situation where you can play there and move in the direction of this unique freedom that you want. And all of a sudden your business, this business or that business, and some of us have more than one, they're all just kind of chess pieces that, yeah, they have their own charter, their own reason for being. But for us, they serve a very personal purpose in helping us move in the direction we want to go.
Man, Mark, just that alone is so powerful. You touched on a couple things. First of all, know what you want and what you are great at and what you would like to do, and putting it all together into one piece tells me as an entrepreneur that I don't have to do the things that I suck at doing. I don't have to work 20 hours a day. That's not what I want. But if that's not what I want, then what I do next is, I'm sure, other parts of the book. But just knowing what you want is so powerful for an entrepreneur. I struggled articulating that, and then when I did articulate it to myself about what I felt like I wanted, then I felt guilty because I want more freedom, but my business needs certain things. So then I've got to complement. I've got to figure out how to solve those things that the business needs. But it doesn't mean that I need to be a workaholic and have failure at home because of what I think the business needs.
Right. Right. And entrepreneurs, I mean, you're probably like this. So many are. The first thing they'll sacrifice is themselves. You're going to work longer. You're going to put in more effort, more time, more money. You're going to pull off the credit card if you have to, right? All this stuff that, you feel like you're doing it to set the positive example, right? Nobody's going to outwork me. Nobody's going to out effort me. And so they'll all rise to this level. But at some point, that self-sacrifice is unhealthy. It's dangerous. It's a built-in limit, right? If you're doing that, it's not sustainable. Back to our discussion about entrepreneurs and capitalism creating a sustainable engine, it's not sustainable, right? So you've got to make choices, have perspective, and build a machine that allows you to get out of that cycle. That you climb, you hit that wall, you crash, and you come back down. And so you got to be able to break through that ceiling.
Well, any other key nuggets? Because I look, I want to capture the whole book, but let's just capture another couple of things, and then I have another couple of key questions I want to ask you.
Sure. So another pillar, just to throw, we already talked about the surround yourself, right? That idea. So that's a pillar. Another interesting one, I think, is I call it commit to your operating system. And one of the things in the EOS world that we believe fundamentally is that it's more important that you choose one operating system to run your business on than it is which one you choose. So don't mix and match. Don't put a bunch of different things, but really pick one and go deep. Master that thing. That's going to be the key to making it work for you. And don't do bits and parts, because that's going to introduce tons of complexity to your organization around language. And, this word means 3 different things because you're taking some from here, some from there, and whatever. And so just pick one. There's lots of good ones. Of course, we think EOS is great, but pick one and dive deep and master it. So we've talked about that as a business operating system. So in Visionary, I lay out what I call the operating system ladder. And it sort of arrives at that from a little bit different starting point. And the starting point is to have an individual or personal operating system, like what I call the exponential freedom framework, or these 9 domains of freedom. That's an example of that allows you to get clear individually on where it is you're trying to go, what you're actually trying to do. And so as we climb the ladder, so we get clear on that, the next step up is a visionary operating system. So how does a visionary entrepreneur run? And so the answer for that are these 10 pillars that I lay out in the book. So we get really strong at these 10 pillars. We get focused on that. So now we're able to be really super effective in that visionary role. So then the next rung is what I call the visionary integrator duo operating system. So now you're in this relationship with an integrator. How do we make that as powerful as it can possibly be? And so that leans heavily on the work Gino and I did in Rocket Fuel, where we introduced what we call the 5 rules of how to maximize your visionary integrator relationship. By the way, the 5 rules have now been adopted by EOS as one of the 20 tools in their official toolbox. So that was the first new tool added to the toolbox since Gino came up with them, I don't know, 150 years ago or whenever he actually started putting those together. So then the top rung on the ladder is actually your business operating system. So that's where EOS would fall in. So get clear on your individual operating system, have a visionary operating system, the 10 pillars, have a VI duo operating system. That's where the 5 rules in Rocket Fuel help you. And then ultimately have a business operating system like EOS. So you're always climbing and pushing it to the next level.
I like it. I love those 5 rules. In fact, we talked about those at length in our the podcast we did 4 years ago. In fact, I'm going to maybe re-release some of those because they were it was really good content.
Do you remember what rule number 1 was?
Crystallize, which is exactly your pillar you talked about, right? Crystallize your vision.
No, well, it's close to that. It's actually stay on the same page. Stay on the same page with your counterpart, which sounds super simple, and it's the one that people don't give enough attention to. They think they're doing it, and they're just not. So it's having that discipline to actually do it and do it well.
It's so hard. Let's listen real quick. So no in runs. So don't let your visionary go around you as an integrator. What were the other 3 real quick?
Owner employee rules of the game. So no playing the owner card, right? So if you're going to be an employee in the business, you need to show up like the best example you can imagine of how an employee would behave. The
integrator's a tiebreaker.
Integrator's a tiebreaker, right? So they're closer to the ground, so they're in a better position to make those decisions in the context of what's going on, and they should already be aligned with your thinking as a visionary because you're staying on the same page. And then the last one is maintain mutual respect. So we want this eye-level relationship, right, where it's not that the visionary is so much bigger, better than the integrator, but we need integrators that are strong enough to really lean into that visionary so they can have a good back and forth on things, and versus the visionary just bulldozing them at every turn.
Hey, Mark, I would be remiss if I did not ask you the Unlocking Moves question, which is what 1 or 2 key pivotal moments or decision points that change the trajectory of your life or your career. I have a couple that might be maybe, coming together to write rocket fuel, but tell me a couple that come to mind for you.
Yeah, so the first one that comes to mind was, when I had my entrepreneurial seizure. So I was a big corporate guy working for Procter Gamble. I was in a situation where I had a responsibility for a large area of retail stores. Procter Gamble back then and to this day sells a very, very vast array of consumer products. And so we had senior execs coming into town, and the MO back in that time was we would basically set them up, if you know what that means. So basically, we would make things look perfect, even though they were not perfect.
Right.
And so I was being asked to do that, and we had some very real competitive threats going on in the marketplace. And stupid Mark's opinion was, you know what? I think if we're going to get support from headquarters, we need to let them see a little bit of this. And so I uttered that perspective to my, at that time, manager. And he leans across the table and he goes, "Mark, don't F with me." Except he didn't say F. He said the whole word. And I mean, it just kind of rocked me back. And so for context, you got to realize I had mapped out that I was going to be the CEO of Procter & Gamble by the age of 43. I knew exactly who was in office, at that time, how long they were going to be there, who was going to be next, exactly how I was climbing the promotional ladder over here on my path. And at age 43, I was going to be the CEO of Procter & Gamble. And so now this guy had just thrown a big wrench in my plan. And I just kind of sat back and I'm like, well, this sucks. That guy over there has my whole career in his hands. And this icky, nasty feeling just kind of came over me that I did not like at all. And so I left that meeting. I went to a bookstore and I looked for anything I could find that said entrepreneur, how to start a business, blah, blah, blah. And there wasn't much. There just wasn't much out at that time. So I grabbed Entrepreneur Magazine, which had like things in the back where you could buy a 3-ring binder on how to start a landscaping company or whatever, right? All these different things like that. And I went home and I just sort of on the drive that night, I made the decision that I've got to leave. I can't continue to operate in a world where somebody else has my future in their hands like that.
Wow.
So a pretty pivotal point for me.
Man, I love it. And I wonder how many people out there in the corporate world are tired of bureaucracy and all the upward mobility or the fighting amongst, trying to get to the top or whatever, that may or may not be set out to be entrepreneurs. But
So I should call out though, at that time for me, ignorance is bliss because I had no idea what I was about to do. I had no idea what I was about to get into. If you had showed me a movie of some of the conversations that I would end up having to have with my wife, it might have scared me off. I don't know. But it was, again, it was wild and woolly and just kind of gnarly and all that stuff. So back to that book, The Entrepreneurial Leap. Before someone makes that leap, please, please, please do a little due diligence and get some context on what it's going to look like.
I like that. That's give yourself a little bit of a guide. Now let's put it into context. You were at P&G for around 6 years, I think. You had an MBA. So what does that put you about 30 years old at the time and married? Did you have kids?
Little less. Yeah. So the day I quit Procter & Gamble, my plan was they were going through a restructure. We and Procter & Gamble had been through several of these. And so what I'd noticed when they would do this is they would offer packages to people to try to get them to leave. And so I remember telling her, I think if they do this, I'm going to make a play. I think I can get a package. That was my thought. Well, not only did they not offer me a package, they basically offered me the best professional opportunity on the table. And I sat there in that meeting with that same guy who I'd had dinner with, a month before. And he says, "Here you go. What do you think?" A big smile on his face, just knowing I'm just going to eat this up and love it. And I said, "Well, I think it's time for me to go."
Wow.
And so, the words were out of my mouth. And then this whole thing gets set in motion that is, you can't stop. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And, I leave that meeting, my peers, the people I worked with, they're in shock. I'm in shock. He's in shock. We're all in shock. And I get to go make a phone call to my wife that says, "Well, I quit." And she goes, "You get a package?" Yeah, they didn't even offer me one. She's like, "Are you kidding me? What are you gonna do?" And so it leads to this whole process of me, fortunately finding a professor. I was still in business school, at University of Chicago, and I get this professor who liked me to let me kinda tag along with him on his consulting work so I could make a little bit of money while I tried to figure out, exactly what I was gonna do and what it was gonna look like. So that's how that went down.
Not only did you not get a package, you turned down a nice promotion to do that. So, I mean, first of all, that's awesome, and probably scared the living crap out of you and your wife at the time, and I bet
Oh,
you wouldn't go back and undo that decision.
and when I called her, she was pregnant with our first child.
Well, look, I have, as you probably do too, countless conversations with somebody in transition. They're in their, 40s and 50s, and they are doing a job that they absolutely hate, and they're maybe making a lot of money. Either they're still with the company, or maybe they're gone for whatever reason, and they're struggling. And I always encourage people to find a way to follow your passion. I know that's easier said than done, but you were, less than 30 years old. It was a little bit, I'll say, easier for you, but at the same time, you had a lot of future ahead of you. And so I think that's how a lot of entrepreneurs are born, is out of these challenging conversations or times out of the corporate world. But I think it's easier to do when you're 30 than when you're 50.
For sure, and, frankly, I was probably beyond the line. I tell my kids, it's way easier before you have kids, before you're married, before you have, a mortgage, before you have all this stuff that we just sort of accumulate, across time, because once you have those things on board, you've got other people's lives to consider. And my view, Kurt, was always, "Hey, even if this thing just goes south and I lose everything, I can sleep in the car. I can live in the car. I'll figure out a way to make it back and I'll be all right." But again, others around you may have zero interest in something like that and probably do, right? So certainly my wife had no interest in something like that. So it changes the game
But look,
entirely.
it probably drove the living crap out of you, because when I started my company out of necessity, because my .com went belly up that I worked for, I had a 6-month-old baby and married for 2 years or whatever, and failure was not an option. I was
Yeah.
not going to put them at, I mean, I did put them at risk, but I was not going to fail. And
Yeah.
so that really drove me. I'm sure it drove you as well. Okay, well, we said 5 or 10 minutes. We're kind of at that point, but let me ask you. I've got one question that's a little bit of a trick question, and that is, what is one question that you're never asked, and either you wish that they would ask you, or you're kind of secretly glad that they don't?
Oh my gosh. What a question I've never asked.
I've got a prompt, but I want to
Give
see
me
what you
give me
got.
a prompt. There's nothing
Well, from what I could
materializing.
tell, there was a couple of early days where maybe your real first integrator role, maybe where you shut down a business that was successful because it wouldn't track in with what you wanted.
Oh, yeah, well, there's more to that story for sure, but yeah, there's,
It sounds like your first job or your first consulting role was not what you expected, and you had to maybe fake your way through it, or maybe I wasn't quite clear on where it was going.
yeah, I'm not sure. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of stories in all those. So I'm up to like 15 different companies, Kurt, that I either started or acquired or shut down because they didn't do what we wanted them to do, or sold off. And some of those huge hits and big success and a lot of good stuff came out of it. Others, we lost the whole thing and more. So I probably don't get asked as much about the things that didn't work,
Let's talk about that, because not many people do talk about that. Let's talk about it.
and I secretly wish people wouldn't ask me about
Well, that's why we're talking about it, Mark. What you got? Because look, I'm the same way. I made probably 200 investments at this point, and people want to talk about the big winners and whatever, and I'm happy to talk about those too. But I also like to talk about the losers, because maybe I won't mention names, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah.
And
So I'll tell you a story there, and I'll try to protect the innocent as I tell it. But it was a business when a lot of options were on the table, and I pursued an opportunity not just out of really financial business case perspective, but more because it was a little bit fun, entertaining, probably a little bit ego. and just a lot of other less tangible things that drove me in that direction. So you combine that with a situation where I want to spend time in it. So I basically hire myself to do the stuff that I should have hired somebody else to do. And it turns out I'm a lot more expensive than they are, and probably not as good. And so I kind of get drawn into this thing versus being, kind of staying in the owner's box. And it turned out to be a situation where there were some material facts misrepresented on the front end that were vital to the ongoing success of the business. So that's one thing that happened. That was a ding. The other one was the Great Recession happened. And so in this case, we were selling a product that was ultra premium in the space, and we'd changed the business model. I mean, it was doing all the right things. So if we probably just had one knock against us, it's probably going to be fine. But you start to add up a couple of these things, and it ends up being a problem. So when the Great Recession started to materialize, the buyer list started to vaporize, and all these orders that we had in the queue just kind of started to go away. And so you could see pretty quick that, okay, the math on this is not going to work. It's not sustainable, and we're going to have a big hole if we're going to try to survive this economic cycle. And so do you really want to put in that much more to try to get through to the other side? And the short answer was no. And so then it's like, all right, how do we get out of this deal? And so that was messy and difficult, and involved a lot of help and support back to peer groups, where I was able to kind of get naked in front of some people that I trusted and cared about, and get some really good, hard, honest advice on, all right, here's how you need to navigate these waters. And ultimately, we made it through to the other side, and got out of it, and closed the thing down, and should have maintained an owner perspective and made sure that the deal truly could survive on its own model. Two, should have not tried to sit in all of the seats myself. Should have, hired people or let people that were there do that. And then three, lessons on due diligence around the upfront purchase, where there's some things in this particular type of company that got by me because I wasn't expert enough in that space.
Nice. Well, look, not all exits are big financially, but sometimes they're big emotionally, and good to get out of. So it sounds like you had a situation there. Thank you for sharing not just your glory stories, but your gory stories, Mark. So, hey, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Please go like and subscribe to Unlocking Moves on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever. And I'm going to beg you, encourage you to go buy the book Visionary by Mark Winters. I know it's going to be a badass read. I'm going to go do it right now on Amazon. And Mark, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves.
Thanks, Kurt. Great to talk to you as always. We'll see you soon.
You too. Have a great Christmas. I want to take this opportunity to wish you a very Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays, happy New Year, all the things. And to personally thank you for being a fan of the show. We were named by Spotify in the top 20% of their video podcasts for 2025. So really appreciate that. And I appreciate you continuing to follow, like, subscribe, all the things to Unlocking Moves on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and all the other places you consume podcasts. Happy holidays from the Unlocking Moves podcast team.